Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, data evangelist with DataVersity. Thank you for joining the latest in the monthly webinar series, Data Architecture Strategies with Donna Burbank. Today, Donna's modus operandi is modern data architecture, practical options for today's data-driven organization. A couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A panel. If you'd like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the chat defaults to send to just panels, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To open the chat or the Q&A panels, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. As always, we will send a follow-up email within a couple of business days containing links to the slide, a recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you the speaker of this series, Donna Burbank. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years of experience helping organizations enrich their business opportunities through data and information. She currently is the managing director of Global Data Strategy Limited, where she assists organizations around the globe in driving value from their data. She has worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies worldwide in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and speaks regularly at industry conferences. She has co-authored several books on data management and is a regular contributor to industry publications. And with that, let me hand the floor over to Donna. Hello and welcome, my friend.
Hello, thank you so much. Good to talk to you again, and good to see everybody on the participant panel. It's always nice to see some familiar names that join each month, which is always nice. Also, often see you folks at Dataversity events where you sometimes come up and say, "Hey, I followed you on the webinars," which is often nice as well. So, moving in, if this is your first time and you're not a familiar participant, this is a series, as Mark mentioned. Um, sorry. And Dataversity is really good about recording all of these, and they keep them on their website. We link to these webinars as well on our website at Global Data Strategy. So if any of these look interesting to you and you missed them, you can catch them. Also, if you're interested in any of the ones coming up, October is metadata management, one of my favorite topics. And December is data modeling, my other favorite topic. So those should be fun as well. But that's not why you came. Today you came to talk about data architecture. Um, so what's interesting and why we have a whole webinar series on data architecture is that it is complex and it's ever changing. And that is why, on a good day, I love my job. And it is such an interesting field to be in, especially now with AI and cloud options and so much more. For those of you who have been in the industry as long as I have, a lot of the stuff we learned in university, but that just wasn't available. We did AI, type things, but the amount of data that's available, the amount of cloud-based options, is just fun and fascinating. However, that can also be very challenging and stressful, especially if you are a head of architecture and you need to define this for your organization, or you're doing a data strategy, or you're not, and you're trying to use one or understand what the architecture does, and you hear these words: warehouse, lakehouse, lake, mesh, all so many different ways you can organize your data. So where do you start? It can seem, yes, fun, Donna, but also overwhelming, right? So that's what, if you haven't joined these webinars before, I try to make them practical. And as Mark mentioned, I do this for a living with a company called Global Data Strategy, and we do this every day. So what I'm going to try to do in this webinar is kind of, and maybe this is normal. I often have these webinars around stuff that folks have asked me, or we've seen at a real client site, because you can read the books and you can see the videos, so a lot of the vendors have a lot of good training. But I think what I can offer in this webinar is what I'm seeing in the real breathing world, and hopefully that's helpful. And as always, we have Q&A at the end if there's pressing questions that you're dying to get asked. And I know folks are never shy at Dataversity webinars. So, if you're feeling like many people, it can sort of be, lions and tigers and bears, AI, like everything is going so fast. And is this something we're supposed to be excited about? Is this something that's going to take my job? Is it somewhere in the between? And we've all heard the classic, which is true, you need good data to support AI, but what does that really mean? So, we'll talk about AI today because you have to. And it's cool. I'm not belittling AI, but there is so much more in addition to that that's available that I don't want to forget that as well. And I think what I'm seeing in kind of practical real world, there's a lot of kind of AI test cases and some AI in production, but don't forget, your good old master data and BI and things like that. So we'll go through that as well. So this is a graph that I showed, I think, in the January webinar, because Dataversity and Global Data Strategy have done a trend survey every year, gosh, 6 or 7 years now. And it's fun because we see some differences and things evolving over time. But one of the things that has not changed in any of the surveys in all of the years we've been doing this is when we say, why are folks doing data stuff, data management specifically, or that's a cousin to data architecture. Number one is always reporting and analytics. And in one sense, that seems obvious. Sometimes I'm frustrated by that because data is more than only analytics. It can be operational, especially when we get into, you know, AI agents and things. Data is actually doing things. But again, it's not a bad thing to say that there is a lot of opportunity around reporting and analytics. And this webinar may be a bit reporting and analytics heavy because I think that it is just sort of the reality that a lot of the demand and a lot of the work we do around data is for the benefit of reporting and analytics. However, and it's not the topic of this webinar, but some of those other items are interesting because I don't think we stress enough that a good data-driven company is more efficient. You save costs. You can, reduce risk, and customers are happier because their information's right and you understand them and you can serve them appropriately and things like that. So there's a lot of benefit around data. However, we do tend to be kind of data analytics reporting, and I would put AI in that category as well. Um, so I find this one another question from that similar survey in terms of, okay, that's what you're looking at now, kind of top of mind, but what are the things you're looking at in the coming years? And again, AI heavy, data science, AI, generative AI, BI and reporting is a bit lower, which surprises me because I think that might evolve, but it's still a need. Self-service reporting and analytics is one that sort of changes from year to year. I know that's always a need. And then there's kind of that Gartner hype cycle. I think folks sometimes get frustrated by the data that's available or the skills or the what that means to do self-service. And that actually will be a bit of a topic today. What does it mean for self-service and where does self-service begin and end? And why am I covering that in a architecture that feels kind of people-centric? Because you've probably heard me say this before. I went into tech because I didn't really want to deal with people if I say it out loud, right? But the more I've been in here, almost 30 years, I realize it's the people is one of the more important things we need to realize, and roles and responsibilities and users and things like that. What I also found interesting, not to keep beating this drum, but we say it in almost every webinar, which is, focusing on the fundamentals. I think folks want to do things like BI and data science and self-service analytics. You really can't do that. Until you have a really good data governance driven by a data strategy with strong data quality, driven by a good data architecture with single version of the truth through master data management and good contextual information through metadata management. And then you'll even see some of the other ones, I could go down: data modeling, data security, data integration. A lot of the top ones aren't necessarily the consumption of data, but the creation. And again, January topic, if anyone wants to go backwards, we kind of talked a lot about this trend survey, and that does seem to be a trend we see a lot where there's a lot of demand for the cool stuff, and then folks almost go back again and say, can't quite do that yet until we get our kind of house in place. Doesn't mean you can't obviously do anything until um, you get all of that right, but that will be a continuing concern and isn't really a surprise for me. Um, so the other thing about this, when you look at this, there's a lot. And again, I'm excited by that. Depending on the day, I get stressed by that. I feel, I think all of us or many of us in the data industry can feel imposter syndrome by the day. The technology changes so much. And I often to myself say, is this a brand new thing I've never heard of and didn't learn in university and I'm lost? Or is this a different version of something we did before but is automated or cloud-based or more powerful with more compute power, or I don't know, or is it someone just using a new acronym for something else? I know in early days of my career that acronyms That's a whole Donna rant that I could do of wish we didn't have them. It just obfuscates things. But is this an acronym that's unique to the client, or is it something like XML that if I don't know what that is, I'm gonna look really dumb in front of the client? So I think we all feel that day to day because things do change a lot or are perceived to change. Again, naming things something different to make it sound new is also another thing we love to do in this industry. So when things get overwhelming and there's a lot of stuff, I go back to this slide, which is when things got complex, look for patterns. We do that with the stars, we can link things together. But I think of that when all of this new technology A or B or C gets thrown at me, I tend to think in patterns, right? So what pattern is this technology supporting? And there may be more, but I think these are some of the common ones. Storage pattern, where do I keep it? In what format do I keep it? Is this cloud on premises? Is it a volume-based thing that I can now, I mean, one of the big rises, is that a word? One of the reasons AI is increasing is partly due to the amount of volume. And I know that can be controversial, these data centers that are getting built. So someone can, you know, generate a picture of a cat playing with a bicycle, right? I don't know, right? But there's a lot more compute power. There's a lot more storage power than it was available before. There's a lot more volume of data that we can use to ingest into things like AI models. Also, where do I keep it in what format? With things like data lakes, I can not only keep structured data, but I can keep documents, huge for things like LLM and AI. I can keep videos, the videos of the cats, I can keep out on my server if I wish. And so I do think, that classic, V's of big data that have kind of, you don't hear about as much anymore, but, the volume, velocity, variety type stuff. It is, I tend to I want to say it in an architecture webinar. That to me isn't the most exciting part of things. I always used to kind of dismiss that as well. That's just infrastructure. The cool stuff is how we design and model it and report on it, which is also true. But I do think I must admit that a lot of the cool stuff we can do now is because of the new patterns of storage. I mean, we just take it for granted that I can just spin up a cloud server and do some cool new, I don't know, sandbox thing with a graph database that one of the cloud vendors has as just part of their platform, and then integrate that with an LLM model and things like that. It's just that does make things a lot more powerful and available to folks, right? Then good old-fashioned data integration. That's another pattern that I swear a lot of the times when I hear something new, I'm like, oh, and when I'm sarcastic and snarky, which is a large percent of the time in my life. So it was just another way to move data from point A to point B. It's good old-fashioned ETL with a new name, right? But there's a lot to that. How do I move it? The frequency, the velocity, I mean, the latency of how I can move that. Do I apply rules to that? Is it a simple lift and shift? Some of the difference between ETL, where you extract data, there's an acronym that I didn't define. Acronym, if you may be familiar, but extract the data, transform it, and load it. That was always what we sort of did in the past with data warehousing. Now with things like data lakes and storage, you can do things like ELT, where you just kind of lift and shift from raw source because we may need it. I don't have to define everything I need right now. It doesn't mean you end there. I think we all kind of were burned by there, although I think a lot of us in the industry were I told you so. You can't just have big data with nothing modeled on top of it. But I think now we can have the best of both worlds with that both combination of ELT and ETL. Of in some cases you just keep the raw data and you can do some data science, just some exploration on that. But there's also a place for ETL where oh, I want some consistent financial reports. I want to transform that, have consistent rules upon it, and things like that. Real-time streaming, right? Or even IoT or Internet of Things. I want to know, just think of Uber, right? One of the classic data-driven companies. I know exactly where the traffic patterns are. I know where the Uber is coming and when it's going to pick me up. That's real-time data that isn't kind of ETL driven, right? So there's so much more available with integration, but that's when I hear all these things and new patterns and new streaming hubs and things involved with a lot of these cloud vendors do offer a lot. Okay, that's my integration pattern. Check, right? The other piece is kind of, and I'll get a lot into this in this webinar, is the who builds it. Again, I said this is a architecture webinar, but I am going to get into the who because I do think that is what's changing a lot. That kind of in the old days or in the current days, it was sort of, well, IT or developers or architects kind of build the data stuff. And now, and as you saw in the previous slide, it's a lot of quote business users or non people without an IT title want to be building stuff because I know what I want to build. Or agentic development, right? If you've kind of followed vibe coding or I don't know how to write anything. I'm just going to ask the AI to build me a program that does X, right? And pros and cons to that. But I think the who and where people are involved is I know that's a question I get a lot as a consultant of like, how do I build my team to support all of this technology and what bucket do they or what group do they sit in, right? The consumption layer is another one of these patterns. How do I consume it? How fast do I retrieve it? Is it a report? Is it a dashboard? Is it a AI chat based? I want to ask an agent or an LLM, show me revenue by region last year or something like that. Or is it application based? Again, I admitted that this is very reporting centric, but we can use data right now. I just use the Uber example. That's real-time use of data to do a thing to get me from place A to B. And there's a lot of that that you're probably doing day to day in your organization, whether it's supply chain or customer service, and all of that is kind of real-time using data to do things, not just reporting, right? The other pattern that I don't want to forget, and it was top of mind in the survey of folks, is understanding and governing. That's kind of your metadata layer of now we have all of this data in all these places and all this opportunity. How do I know where everything is? How do I monitor over time to make sure that it's still good and still usable? And how do I define it? And I won't go into, you know me, I could do a whole webinar on what do we mean by customer, by product, right? But if you don't know that and AI doesn't replace that. AI makes that even more important. Words mean things, and if an LLM is reading words, we want to make sure we're using the right words for the right thing, right? So that's things like your data dictionary, your data lineage, data observability, which is a bit more active monitoring of your data pipelines and things, and then the glossary, which is your business definitions of things. So there may be more patterns. I just find myself when I see a new technology or I'm developing an architecture, I've been signed up that customer A or even our own company needs to do an architecture thing. What are the patterns of both consumption, production, source, integration, and then monitoring that I need to put together? So um, I said this may be kind of people centric, but as I was putting this together, and as I said, as I was thinking of a lot of the questions that my clients have been asking me lately, as they build an architecture, not, I expect clients to ask me, I'm staffing a team or I am building a data governance framework, who does what? I've been getting a lot of these questions as we build architecture. And so I thought, as I think what might be interesting in this webinar, what are folks asking? I thought this might be helpful, especially also where we here have the lions and tigers and bears AI. Like, is AI going to take our job? Who does things? Where do people do things, and where do machines do things? And who does what with machines where? Right, that was terribly said. But in the old days could even be just, gosh, 5 years ago, 2 years ago now, depending on the company, right? But it felt like the lines were a little bit more clear that if we go, let's go right to left, business users wanted to do a thing. They wanted to report something. I would like to know total revenue by product by year, please, right? So the developers, this could be, these are high level boxes. There may be many roles within here, but let's just keep it simple. The developer could build that report that align with the business user requirements. And whether it took a short time or a long time, here's your report, business user. I hope you like it. We'll work together to get that right, right? To do reports and applications, you need good data engineers, data architects, again, a suite of roles where you move and transform and again, take it. Is it a lakehouse? Is it a warehouse? How do we transform the data and to make it clean and nice and pretty and usable and productized so that developers can build those reports? And then, there was infrastructure and software, and that might be your engineering team, or your IT team, or your DBAs, or whatever that kind of kept that stuff running. And then, even though it's more popular now, I think for a long time we've had, you could say, data management professionals, data governance professionals, or whatever. Again, these are kind of indicative roles that they're helping all of those folks above kind of govern, control, manage this whole software that can do that. Might be your data catalog, your metadata repository back in the day. Where's the data, who's storing it, what do the things mean? That just doesn't happen automatically. So those were kind of the very, I felt, clear roles, and everyone was, you could say it was frustrating because it took a long time. There's pros and cons to that approach, but I think this was almost your classic way folks worked. As we go into this idea of self-service, I like to clarify what we mean by self-service, right? I think the initial request that I saw was, and I'm actually a fan of this, of business users know what they want, and may be able to build, especially where a lot of the technology is so much easier to use now. And you could say business users are becoming more savvy and data driven. They can build their own reports. If the data is good and the data is organized and trusted with all of those other, non-blurred roles there, the data engineers and the data architects and the data management team, business users can go in and say, okay, no, I don't want to sort by, revenue, by product, by region. I want to add also top customer. And then I want to break region into countries and maybe cities and see if cities are different within each country. Right. That's the stuff that that's how the brain works. Business users want to be able to be collaborative and drill down and change and not have to wait 3 months to say, nope, I want it by city, not by country. Right. That if the data is good, again, that should be easy for the business to do. And again, the business knows the business, right? So that, they don't necessarily have to explain why they're doing it, or there may be nuances that, the technical team might not understand. I think in a typical org, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I think it's a both and, right? There is a skill set for business intelligence. There's best practices. Usually there's some sort of COE or center of excellence that might train business users, or they may create kind of the enterprise reports, and then folks can kind of do things on their own for more, department reports, their own ideas. But I think this is a more common, almost business as usual for many, many orgs. But I would say, of course, this only works when the data is good. What I am seeing more recently, full disclosure, I do have some concerns over this, is this idea of self-service data prep, where not only do business users know their requirements to build their own reports, but they're building their own pipelines. And I can see the value of this in some cases for exploration and stuff. I know the system, can I just get it from the system and kind of build my own thing? Maybe. I think, and we'll talk about this in a bit, I get a little nervous about that. Are we now creating more silos? And are we because I often see tech teams kind of happy with this. Oh, good, they can go do that themselves. I'll build the infrastructure and then go big, right? Is it that we don't have enough architects, enough data management? There is I think as we get deeper into the tech, there's a lot of domain knowledge about how to build an effective pipeline, how to build a well-structured data set, whether it's a data warehouse or an ODS or a graph, right? I mean, how am I that is a whole profession, right? So I think that makes me a bit nervous. And is IT or data management or data engineering kind of, just good? You guys can go do the hard stuff, right? Because I think the benefit of joining up the data in the proper way and having common business rules and all of that is very, very beneficial. But I'll talk about the pros and cons sometimes of some of this approach. But I am seeing this more. And again, I'm open to other people's ideas here too, but I know also I build these webinars a lot about what I see in the real world. We've got about 3 clients now who are with us that kind of did this, and now they are kind of trying to clean it up, right? That this was great to get people involved. It was great to get things quick. But now we have 6 different versions of customers and 4 different reports on total revenue that don't match. And we have a lot of just crazy, spaghetti diagrams. It can work, and I'll kind of go through some ways I've seen it work. I don't want to be all negative Nelly, but this one does make me nervous, and partly because we're cleaning up a bunch of this stuff. And I've also seen the business users go, it's like going to the restaurant. It's like, yeah, I want to pick my menu and maybe I want to go to a buffet, but when I have to like slaughter the cow and bring it into the kitchen and cook it, like, isn't that why I went to a restaurant? Maybe that was kind of gruesome, but that's not why I went to a restaurant. So where are the proper lines? Um, I also have seen it all, and again, I'm kind of one of these people myself, sometimes depending on the use case, because a lot of these cloud platforms are so easy to provision. I've seen whole departments say, we don't need IT. I'm just going to go and, spin up Azure, AWS, and look at all these cool tools, and they don't seem that hard. And And is that a bad thing? Because why are we going around IT? Is it because we're not getting along? Is it because they're too busy? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We can talk about that, and we will in the slides that come. But it is a thing I am seeing more because, again, the ease of access, the ease of use. You don't necessarily have to go buy your own server and put it in a room and have someone maintain it and all of that. So that is a trend I'm seeing with some of the, and I think it's one of the cool things actually that these tools are more available and easier to use. We just have to make sure we get the roles and responsibilities right, to make sure they're optimized. Um, the other piece I'm seeing is on that bottom piece, that metadata management, where business is more involved. Look, this business just took over the world in the slide. That I think a positive part of this is that a lot of these metadata tools are more collaborative, because and I'll, kind of what we'll talk about later, there is a very positive piece of this in that the business knows the data. I want to do that exploration, and maybe I don't know what the trusted data sets are. Oh, let's go look at this data set, or hey, here's a different definition of customer I hadn't thought of, or right, or even in the very well governed, your classic finance or whatever. What do we mean by customer and revenue and things like that? That's a business piece. So I think the fact that these tools are easier and more collaborative, I think is a very positive to get the business a little more close to the data and metadata that is theirs to manage. So, but that is a trend I'm seeing, that business and tech are either getting so far apart that people are doing their own thing, or more so blended together that it's much more cohesive. And I think I've seen both, depending on the organization, right? But business is kind of putting their being more involved in each of these areas. The other thing that we kind of started with is where does AI fit, and do we even need human beings in each of these layers, right? I think, and I'll talk about what I actually see in the real world, but the opportunity is that AI could be in each of these layers, right? I mean, you could have an AI kind of generate some requirements from LLM, from documents, or even the data, and says, it looks like you guys are talking a lot about total revenue by region. Let's make a report for that, right? And I have seen this one, where folks are kind of experimenting with, I personally love a good old dashboard, but I'm a data person. I want to see my chart that says revenue by region, but a lot of folks don't think that way and don't want to see it that way. They want to be able to say, "Hey Siri, show me total revenue by region." Are there pros and cons to that? Absolutely. But I do think there's some opportunity there. And I have had, um, I'm working with one deeply and one just starting, with folks kind of doing some test cases around that. Can AI kind of go into the vibe coding world? Can AI build data pipelines? Can AI code, development? Can AI kind of see the patterns when someone says, show me revenue by region, and build a warehouse from that, right? I mean, I think there's opportunity for that. If you're asking me right now, um, is this ready for prime time? I would have some concerns, but is it maybe even a first? You get yourself 80% there and have a human do the rest. I think there's opportunity. A lot of these agents that people are building, if we go to the far left and kind of provisioning cloud platforms, um, I mean, AI agents, a lot of the benefit, or what is an AI agent? Is it just an automated process, if we're being cynical, or where is it true AI? But for a lot of these tasks, either monitoring or actually provisioning things that are kind of common tasks, can that more be automated? Um, Down at the metadata layer on the bottom, AI there, I think is absolutely excellent and absolutely terrible, depending on the use case. Where I think it's great, what AI is good for is seeing patterns. And so things like data lineage, how are things linked together? And yes, we had that before, that was automated before AI, right? But there can sometimes be gaps of what a non-AI lineage can do. Seeing patterns in data. Hey, this looks like a social security number. Hey, this looks like a phone number that a person shouldn't have to go look for. I mean, that's a great use of AI. AI generating data definitions makes me nervous, because are we skipping that hard conversation of what do we mean by a product and a customer or a region? But can it also? I mean, I know when I go in and have to create definitions for customers, what do I do? I read through their website. I read through documents. I talk to people. Could AI look at for conversations that people had, and generate at least a first draft of a definition? I will reluctantly say, yeah, that actually would be kind of interesting. Is it the final definition? No, right? I mean, for preparation for this, webinar, I asked Chat GPT to, please define what a customer is. It gave a nice kind of vanilla, boring. It's something, a person or organization that purchases a service or product, but that really doesn't help when you're in the nitty-gritty of your organization and your nuance, right? So, it can help, it can jumpstart, but I would say it's not the final be all end all. So will we all be replaced by AI robots? I would not say today. Someone has to manage this. Someone has to get the data right for AI to do its thing. But I did think it was kind of interesting that, just like business is sort of augmenting a lot of the tech roles, now we have tech. We can get all like meta and philosophical here. Tech is actually involved in this conversation as well. So the lines between technology, people, and consumers and creators, and is super exciting, but I think also kind of risky, and we'll have to kind of think through that as well. So I found that kind of philosophical and interesting as I was kind of preparing for this webinar and would kind of think through that. So what does that mean to architecture? What is practical in the real world, right? You can talk about all this philosophical stuff. What are people really doing in the real world? Sorry for the Barbie reference. I'm not really even a Barbie fan, but I thought it fit. What you can talk about this stuff, but what's realistic? Probably your first architecture webinar with Barbie reference in it. So, oh no, if you've listened to Karen Lopez, she does that all the time. Give Karen Lopez a call out. She would like this slide. This is, you've probably seen before in my webinars. I kind of often use it as kind of just a generic, fictitious sample components that are involved in a modern data architecture. You may be using all of these, you may be using just pieces of these, you may be using others, and you'll say, hey, Donna, you forgot. Yeah, I probably did, right? Because there's so much out here, but I do think this is a fairly comprehensive start at least. So we call this, in my company kind of call it the left to right diagram, that this is almost your classic reporting ecosystem, right? Where you have your operational data on your left, where you're actually using data to do things. This the upper left could be a facilities management or your orders or your registration of customers or students. You could have sensor data. I mean, and that's sort of where we ended up in the old days, right? That first picture we had where we had, customer business user asked for a report, revenue by region, sent it to the developer. We built the warehouse. Kind of that first row up top is your classic take it from your operational system, land it in an area, structure it in a way, often a warehouse, put a semantic layer or a cube so that the people can do self-service, and then report on it in BI. I still see that pattern every day. It's still very valuable, hasn't gone anywhere. I think it's even more beneficial now, where there's so much chaos of can we get some very structured, well-formed definitions of data? What do we, and I have, I don't even say how many, several customers right now where the CEO can't get a clear report of how many products do we sell by region, by customer. I mean, I'm not just saying that because it's a common thing, but I am no longer surprised when I go into massive brands that we all use every day. And you say that to somebody, yeah, they don't even really know how many products they sold. Are they profitable? Yes, but could they be more profitable if they could get into that nuance? So that pattern doesn't go away, super valuable. I think companies will always want to know how well they're doing, and kind of that's a class. It's not the only use case for warehouse, of course, but that should be well documented and well, I can't think of the right word now. Lineaged is the right thing. You want to see the audit trail, right? One thing that makes me nervous with too much of AI, you don't know how it came up with an answer. But I think something like finance, I want to know, you do need to know the audit trail of how I came up with that number. So that particular pattern, I guess if we go back to patterns, is still a common one, still great. One of the things we can do now with kind of a data lakehouse architecture is there on the left that sensor data, log files, videos, documents are huge for things like AI and LLM. And can we store that in kind of a unstructured data area? It doesn't only mean that we're doing it internally. Can we look at social media? Can we buy data? Can we look at the internet? We can do a lot of things for your kind of data science, AI analytics. There's things to look at videos and graphic. I mean, I think a lot of the cool stuff we think of when we think of AI or scary or however you want to look at it are videos, that I can type in, show me a picture of a frog on a bicycle and you get one. I'm actually having a lot of fun playing with that in some areas, right? You may need something like a vector database to kind of, do that tagging of pictures and things like that. Documents are huge for LLM. Whereas document management and data management, I still don't understand, never did, of why they were such separate things. Um, they're becoming much more closely aligned now because a lot of the LLMs is on kind of text-based type of things. Um, so, but still a similar pattern. I have a data somewhere. I have data somewhere. I integrate it or move it, whether it's ELT or ETL, or I stream it, or I do it in batch. And then I move it through the pipeline to report on it or do analytics on it. Things like master data management, I think, are even more important or as important with AI and everything now. How do I get a nice, clean, single view of each of my customers, each of my products, my vendors, suppliers, students, patients, citizens, all of that is still a need for master data. And then my good friend at the bottom, metadata, right? I think even more so, we are seeing data catalogs and data lineage and data observability and glossaries and data dictionaries become so important because there's so much more, right? If you're a small firm and all your customers are in a spreadsheet and you have one BI report that tells you how much you sold, you probably don't need a big fancy metadata repository. You probably know what you mean by customer and you know what a region is, right? But as we get across all of these sources and so many eyes using it and consuming it, I think things like metadata repositories become even more valuable. And I think the vendors are seeing that too. Um, I did it way back in the day before it was cool, so I'm happy to see that now it is cool and everyone's looking to do it. So let's go back to kind of the people aspect, or my okay, what this pink things is like what's happening actually in the real world, right? So I circle with a pink Barbie what I'm either getting questions on or seeing in the real world, right? So I get this question a lot of how do I build good self-service reporting, using the what's an actual real layer here. So I do think we need data engineers and architects to build those trusted data sets, whether we want to call that a data product or we want to call that a data warehouse or whatever it is, that has to be trusted. I typically see if we're thinking I'm kind of in parentheses self-service BI reporting. This isn't data science and kind of advanced analytics here in this use case, that usually it's a set of report developers, your BI team, as I mentioned earlier, maybe your center of excellence. I am a fan of a semantic layer. I see not enough customers using it, or they use it because I'm not pro or con any tool in this webinar, but say like a Power BI, there's a semantic layer with each report. But are you using it in a consistent way where I have all the proper joins together for the business user? And I might have even have pre-calculated the definition for total revenue. So now business user A, I just want to know total revenue. I drag it on, and yeah, that's easy. Drag it onto my report, and yeah, that's easy, but it's also more consistent and more governed, right? And so I don't care if the business user makes the report blue or slices revenue by region or by customer or by product line or by whatever. It's already been developed and vetted in this semantic layer. So I see this as a nice, and maybe the engineers or the architects build the semantic layer, or this is kind of a range or a trend. And I often see those that center of excellence or the BI team, maybe they might do your enterprise reports, the ones that are consistent, that have been vetted through governance, the financial reports or the annual report that goes to the board or something like that. That is typically a great role for that kind of BI center of excellence. They may give training and support to the business users that may be embedded in the business. And I think that's a nice virtuous combination, right? Because finance analyst in finance knows finance and all the nuances of that more than the report developer does. And if they can kind of share their knowledge in the best of both worlds, right? Of where it makes sense for the business to do their own questioning and, ooh, what if I sliced it this way? Or what if I added this in? As long as the data is well formed, well documented through both a good data structure that's designed well, good semantic layer. I think that works really nicely and is the best use of most people's time. I do see happy customers here, right? Where I often get, sometimes the BI team or even the architect, do I really have to change everybody's little report here and there? No, you don't. And they probably don't want you to either, right? So I think it puts the right skill and knowledge level in folks' right hands. I think in this case, back to the metadata layer, your little robots there. I think, auto-populating from stuff that's been built and architected by an architect and generating that data dictionary and inventory and lineage. Absolutely, yes. I do see a distinction. I mean, don't be lazy. There's a difference between developing a source to target mapping and designing a data model that should be done by a person. But once that is live in the databases, I think it's a terrible use of someone's time to look at a database and document data types and things like that. Like that's really good, and that's before AI. I mean, I've been doing that for 25 years, right? Reverse engineering from a database, right? Or even some limit lineage, automate that, right? Automate some pattern detection and things like that. I think data management or data kind of on the right there, the business and your data governance or data management team. I think those folks collaborating, there is generally some domain knowledge needed. How do you configure one of these data catalogs? How do I organize the domains and the hierarchies and how I show the data and the security levels and all that? But the business users should be defining the terms in there, the glossary terms. They should be collaborating and maybe having chat saying, oh gosh, I don't agree with this definition and can we change it or, things like that. So I think that's a handshake as well, where you have some experts in data management and you have experts in the business, hopefully working together. So I see this as a fairly common pattern. I see it as one that works well, and I do see it one that's coming more and more often as the tools get easier and the demand actually gets easier. And often, these engine architects, developers love their job and they love doing it. It's just the demand is so big they can't create reports for everybody. So that's a good thing. In the world of self-service data prep, which I kind of complained about a little bit earlier, I've also seen working. So again, this kind of Barbie sign is the what have I seen working well in the real world? I think there's a best of both worlds here. I will say, and you can fight me in the hallway, that when we're talking about enterprise use, production, like high volume, data warehousing for your financial reports type of thing, or high volume, that really should be a skilled data engineer, data architect, where they're building these reusable pipelines. So part of it's a skill thing, part time thing. That's a whole full-time job, and part of it's the reusability thing. Somebody needs to be looking at all of this. And again, I've seen the patterns a lot when we go into a client. We often create kind of your current state architecture, and one of the common things we find is here's 27 pipelines all extracting vendor address from the same system. Is that done consistently? In one sense, they trim out if it's a, they trill out the LLC. Sometimes they capitalize things. So not only is that redundant effort, it's also inconsistent. So having one team that's doing it once with well-defined reusable rules, do we trim LLC off the end name of a company or do we not, right? Or do we, whatever needs to be done. Those are common, hopefully documented business rules, right? But you don't want to, what do you call it? Stymie, the business users from doing their thing either, right? Because I mean, human nature is, oh, what about this? I want to kind of discover things. And again, there's great self-service data prep tools in the market that are really easy to use. And so I think if it's done in the right way, in a governed way, it can be the best of both worlds. So what I've seen is maybe there's an exploratory, again, zone pattern server. I'm technology agnostic here, right? But this could be a virtualization layer, something like a Denodo. This could be I am using tools, but sometimes that's the easy ways to say it. A self-service data prep where it's like an Alteryx or something like that, right? Where the business, and they're easy enough to use, the business knows the data. They're using the application. They're like, oh, I want X, Y, and Z. Where and they can kind of build some of these test cases, and some of the answers might be no, that didn't work. Some answers it's yes, and where it's yes and it needs to go to production, that's where it can be promoted up through that enterprise use. So that goes into the backlog or the pipeline for the engineers to say, okay, this is something we're going to have to report on a lot. Let's do it once and do it well. And I have seen this work really, really well. With the where it breaks down is, and we've seen this in not only this use case, but so many, that the pilot turns into production. There has to be well governed that the business users, quote, just doing exploration doesn't turn into a report that's sent to the annual report and, or we have 16 versions of that report and that kind of thing. But I have seen that as the best of both worlds where It's almost, it's back to my restaurant analogy. What's the folks where you pick all like usually oh gosh, Mongolian barbecue or whatever, where you pick all the things you want in the meal and the chef fries it up for you. So it's kind of that. I should have had that analogy ready before I used it, but you know what I mean. So I think that works well. I think in this you have to have very good metadata management in terms of, do I know which data I'm using? Are there published data sets? Do I know what data means? But I think in that exploration, that's often where you can discover that through the business users, but also the governance, and I don't have it in the slide, but that the maturity and governance to make sure that, as I said, exploration stays at exploration and production stays as production, and the teams work well together. But I have seen that work really, really well. Um, Okay, I kind of talked about this already, but in terms of if you were to ask me, out of all these patterns, and I didn't go through all of them in an architecture, I kind of did that on a data modeling webinar I did earlier this year. If you wanted a little more techie version of this, I think it was a couple months ago, try that one. But this is a little more on the people side. But if you were to ask me I didn't put a Barbie sign on this one, but what's the most common pattern I see across all of these? I would say it's the data lake house. To me, that's kind of my favorite because it's the best of both worlds, where especially in the tools are almost a lot of these cloud platforms, you can have if you think of the more traditional world, I have my landing staging, warehouse semantic layer report. You can have that raw landing area where you have my unstructured or even my structured data where the data science team might say, I don't want it in a warehouse. I want to just see it raw and I want to see some patterns and exploration and things like that. Or you could point out a vector database against your videos and things like that. So I think and a lot of these tools really become ecosystems of in your cloud platform. You can have a lot of these pieces that fit together. Does it need to be governed? Do you still need things like master data and metadata and things like that? Absolutely. But if you were to ask me, that's kind of what I'm seeing most often. And I would say, and I didn't show this particular survey result, but when we look at the technologies that a lot of folks are using for your actual day-to-day business, it still is relational database because it is kind of good for a lot of the things we do in business, like finance, like supply chain, like, a lot of that is a structured use case. Is it the only use case? No, we have sensor data and videos and documents and things like that, but that ain't going away. And I think managing that well is a good pattern. We do see more cloud relational data storage, but that's not the only way either. And I don't have a slide on that, but thought it was worth saying cloud is cool. It can be expensive. It isn't for everybody. I have two net new clients right now building their brand new data ecosystem, and two of them went fully on-prem. There were security issues, there were pricing issues that they did have the skills and the hardware to do it. So don't feel like you're the only one thinking of that everybody always has to go cloud. A lot of the vendors love it. It's subscription revenue they can have forever. Pros and cons to that, but it is an option to still go on-prem, and I'm seeing a bit of a resurgence there, just in the spirit of what am I seeing in the real world. Okay. AI, had to throw that in there. So what am I personally in our company seeing in terms of what folks are doing AI? I'll start with the upper right, and this I'm seeing them mostly right now in exploratory, but I know a lot of the BI vendors kind of have add-ins where you can do more of that natural language chat. I mean, some of that we could have kind of done before, but that's an AI thing. I want to see total sales by region, and I want to tell you that, not necessarily have to look at a report that, or it will generate the report from that, right? And obviously, kind of in the box below that, I'm seeing a lot of these kind of agents, automation. They're generally right now, and I think a lot of companies would agree that's a good idea. You started as a pilot in a use case. Is it fully in production? I want to create an agent for my HR onboarding. These are common tasks that can have an agent do and not a human. Test that out first. It can be powerful, but I am most of the companies I'm working for, they're kind of in a pilot stage. LLM, ChatGPT, I would say that's the one I see the most, and that a lot of that's document, meeting summaries, ChatGPT for discovery. I think that's a interesting thing. Also, be careful. Do we know where that data is coming from, right? You could, if you just do a, I mean, that could be a whole webinar, I'm sure it is, right? Who, where, the privacy of that data, the ownership, the copyrightability of that information. I do have some companies saying, well, this makes a lot of sense. Data is my strategic differentiator. I want to do an LLM off my data. That makes a whole lot of sense. So thinking of what data goes in there, a lot of the cloud platforms do have kind of um, add-ins, or like patterns for that as well, and it's something to play around with. Think of that as too, like we have a policy on, I know the first time I saw a meeting, literally record everything I have and you know say everything I'm saying. Do you always want that, and where does that go? Be careful of, now that it's written down and who's allowed to use that, right? So what are you talking about in that meeting, right? So I think that I can talk today. That is kind of what a lot of folks kind of think of when folks are thinking about AI. They think ChatGPT. That is only one model of it, but it's a pretty common one. Back to the upper left, this idea of AI writing code. I think a lot of folks on this call write code and maybe say, hey, yeah, that sounds would be nice, but is it realistic? I would say, and I've had even folks on my team say, I didn't know this particular language, or I didn't know, and so it's kind of might give you a first idea. And if you've gosh looked at LinkedIn or anything, as everyone's, I built this cool vibe coding thing in a weekend. Yeah, but did it go to production? So I think like a lot of things, or even I do a ChatGPT query, back it up, right? It might just be a first kind of idea, but I don't see too much of that in production yet. Metadata on the lower right, I've kind of talked about that already. Pattern-based lineage, discovery of, you shouldn't have a human looking through every record to see if it's a SSN. That's a great use for AI. We didn't talk enough that again, that could be a whole webinar, but a lot of the drive in metadata is for AI. What is this content? What are the labels on this data to be able to use? So one of the reasons metadata is seeing a resurgence. So looking at the clock, want to add some time for questions. Um, but yeah, reporting and analytics, although there's a lot of different use cases in terms of architecture patterns is a common one. I'm going to sound like a broken record that to get all of this cool, either AI or even BI, you need to have those fundamentals of your master data, your metadata, or things like that. But I do think roles in technology are blurring, and give that some thought if you've been thinking of doing an architecture or you've been tasked with an architecture. Think of both who's the consumer, producer, and where those roles might fit. Because I've often seen architectures break down because of the roles, and that's a more common question I see. And if you are looking at all of this and you're just kind of overwhelmed with all of the crazy options and exciting options out there, maybe think of those patterns, right? New technologies thrown at me. Which pattern is this? Is this storage? Is it ingestion? Is it consumption? Is it metadata management? Is it a mix of the two, right? So I know that helps me in kind of what category this fits and where it might fit into your architecture. And I just do that naturally, but sometimes when I see really crazy things, not to that are strange in an architecture, it's because that wasn't thought through. And when you say it out loud that way, I had one client of teased before and they teased themselves, so it's fine. But they literally had three different master data management systems. And so we say that out loud. What pattern is that? That's a pattern of creating storage for a single version of the truth. And I have three single versions of the truth. Does that make sense? Right? Or a pattern of data ingestion. Okay, we could do self-service data prep, but now I have 16 patterns of getting the same information from the same system. Is that a good and healthy pattern? Right? So think of it that way can really help. I like to draw the pictures, do a system architecture diagram. That often really can clarify things. So, if you liked this, there's more this year. We hope to see you in October or December. We merge December and November together because it's a popular holiday time of year. And with that, I will pass it. Oh, we do this for a living. Had to throw that in there. If you need help with your architecture or staffing or anything else, give me a call or my team. My email's in the second slide. And now I will pass it over to Mark for questions and thoughts.
A couple of
Over to you.
questions, and chat was electric as they always are. It's a huge debate on data products going on in chat, which was fun to read. But somebody asked a question that leads me to a segue, and I want to get your thoughts on it. There's messaging that business needs to go cloud-based to realize true advanced analytics and AI, uh, based on what you were saying. Um, sorry, based on what you were saying, Donna, that's not the case? Question mark. I read that bad, but do you want me to reread
Um,
that?
No, I think I got the idea. You can't do any of this cool stuff unless you have cloud. I don't think that's necessarily true, but it does make it easier. So what can cloud offer? A lot of these cloud platforms have kind of built-in tools for, integrating LLM into their systems and things like that. And then with the storage and kind of that, you can expand your storage easier and more quickly, and you don't have to spin that up because it's going to be a cost either way. So in terms of ease of entry and scalability, cloud can be appealing, and you don't want to do either of those lightly. But compare the two costs that might be helpful for you, and how much is compute. Sometimes storage is they're saying that for a reason, right? It's
Mhm.
profitable for them. Which is, so think that through. Is the storage cheap, but the compute going to be really expensive down the road? And the clients I've seen that maybe have their own server farm, or they are on the larger, if you're I don't know, a dog rescue and you have 10 employees, cloud might make more sense. You're not going to have your own, um, data center somewhere. But a lot of the companies that I have, that either their data is they don't want to be controlled by the vagaries of a vendor. And will this ever
Mhm.
happen? I don't know. You could say it's like having your money under your bed, because you're afraid of the banks. But they know that their data is an asset, and they decided that they want to have their own data center, and keep their data there, and then it's kind of the costs are more controllable by them. Again, that's not neither one of those is a small decision, but I did want to say that is an option, and people are doing it. So I would say cost it out. What is going to be my volume versus storage and compute? Think of both. What would do I have the skills in house to manage my own servers and things like that? But I have also seen, I'll shut up in a second, but I've seen not only the big folks with their own servers, because the question was around AI and some of those bigger ones. I've seen smaller shops where SQL Server on-prem still working for them, because they're just, they don't have a large volume, and they do have a DBA, and it's fine. So you don't have to rush to cloud either. Although it is a higher and higher percentage. I'm not being an old Luddite, but I just wanted to kind of say there's other options.
I love how you raised that, and I like how somebody in chat asked this because I've had a couple of friends who have moved to on-prem because they turn on their AI and start have it learn against their data in the cloud,
Hmm.
and then at month end they wonder why they have a six-figure compute bill.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I like how you raise the check out the cost for what you're trying to do and make sure that the value's there. And yeah, compute can really sneak up on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do have another question here. I'm curious, based on your consulting experience, have you observed that newer organizations such as startup are organically adopting chat-based data strategies influenced by the younger demographic of their leadership teams, while legacy domains like banking and government remain more focused on traditional reporting? And if so, do you think that this is a shift we should proactively incorporate into our data strategy to ensure future proofing? It sounds like a webinar series almost. That's a great question.
It could be. Well, you asked me just in my experience. I, I I would say in some ways it's the opposite. If we're going to stereotype people, that sometimes if you're going to say, because I don't want to stereotype. Gosh, older people kind of invented the internet nowadays, right? So it doesn't mean older means non-technical. But sometimes it is maybe, I'm thinking of head of finance, no, not finance, because finance gets data, but they don't want to use tech, right? And so sometimes it's the non-technical older folks that want to just talk, right? I mean, my mom likes to talk to Siri. That's very kind of, I would say the difference I've seen sometimes is how folks collaborate. They might want to go to Slack versus an email, but I haven't seen that so much in the reporting. And in fact, I might see it. Sometimes it's the more traditional ones that are going there. But yeah, interesting thought. I think it could be a webinar series to kind of talk through that, but I haven't seen that pattern.
And we have one question that just popped in, and I think this is the last one we have time for. It's mostly related. How do we determine roles between IT and functional teams like HR when developing data governance strategies? Currently, we are very siloed, says the questioner.
Gosh, that could be a webinar and is, but I would just quickly say an easy way to think of it in terms of my pattern of that is when you think of governance, what is somebody accountable for, right? So IT should be accountable for, kind of helping with some of that infrastructure, setting up the data catalog. HR needs to be accountable for HR data, right? And the decisions, but some of that's cross-functional, which I think the person's getting at. If we're talking about employees, it isn't just HR, right? Finance looks at employees, sales looks at employees, et cetera, et cetera. So I think creating that community where everybody has a voice and also has accountability, but from the business should lead eventually governance. It shouldn't be an IT thing.
Yeah, I've run into that a lot in my career too, Donna, where it's coming up from IT and I'm trying to talk to people and it's like, you're just the IT guy. And I'm like, no.
Absolutely.
All right, that's all we have time for. Donna, any parting thoughts before I hit the end button?
No, I want to thank everyone for joining and until next month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you, chat, for being so electric, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.